the Lord. Today we celebrate the memorial of Saint Camillus de Lellis. He was born in 1550 and died in 1615. And he had many burdens. As a young man growing up, his father was absent most of the time. His father was involved in the military, having grown up in and around the kingdom of Naples, in present-day Abruzzo. His mother died when he was 12, and he was bouncing between different people's homes. And eventually, at the age of about 14, he starts going along with his father on some of the battles that happened. And very quickly, as someone who wasn't very experienced in battles and in war, he got very seriously injured. A serious injury on his leg. They tried to heal it, and eventually the doctors said it was incurable. And he had all of these burdens upon him. Eventually he was placed into a hospital in Rome at the time. It was called St. James of the Incurable. A bit perhaps like some of the hospitals we might have thought of in the past, of where people had terrible, incurable diseases. And that's where Camillus was placed. And he had all sorts of burdens, both in terms of his physical health, but then his experiences in the military had perhaps brought him involved with the wrong sort of crowd of people. He developed an addiction in terms of gambling and of alcohol as well. And Camillus is one of the patron saints of those who suffer from gambling addictions. In the midst of all this, he was in this hospital, and he wasn't doing so well, and he came across a guy who eventually became a saint. We celebrated him a couple of months ago, a guy called Philip Neri, who was visiting this hospital. And Philip realised there was something in this guy who needed a bit of support, a bit of encouragement, even though things weren't going so well for him. And Camillus, interestingly, has this experience of God. They talk about a conversion that happens at this moment. He'd been a Catholic from a very early age. But he has this conversion to Christ. He tries to put aside some of his demons that are within him, these burdens that have been carrying with him. And within this hospital, he then starts to become the one who starts to organise life for others within the hospital. He wasn't a doctor, he wasn't a nurse, but he started to organise life for those who were living there, who had incurable diseases like himself, all sorts of probably disabilities of different types. And he starts to give them hope. And he goes and sees Philip Neri on a regular basis. And Philip then says, I think you've got some of the qualities needed to be a priest. He said, you're not perfect. You've got plenty of burdens that you're carrying, but you can inspire others to love Jesus Christ. And Camillus said, okay. So he then went through a training process, and he was, through the assistance of Philip Neri, he was actually ordained a priest in Rome by the last of the bishops from Wales. Before, Wales had no bishops for a couple of hundred years due to the things that were happening in England and Wales at that time. So he was ordained a priest, and he then starts a religious order dedicated specifically to assist those who are in hospitals. Similar situation to his own, who have these burdens. You mightn't have heard of the Camillians before, but you might hear about them in the future. As of just 3 weeks ago in Sydney, the Archdiocese welcomed 3 priests of the Camillian religious order, which is a religious order started by St. Camillus, which is dedicated to assisting in hospital ministry. They started 3 weeks ago in Sydney at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, and they're going to run the parish also of Camperdown. They've been in Australia for about 8 or 9 years. They were welcomed into Parramatta Diocese a few years ago to help with hospital ministry at the Westmead Hospital. So if you visit those places, you might come across them. They've got quite a distinctive habit with a big red cross on it, reminding perhaps of that ministry in relation to hospitals. And they're dedicated, since the time of Camillus, to doing just ministry within hospitals, giving people a glimmer of hope in the midst of those burdens, which is so much goes with what our gospel talks about today. Come to me, all you who labour and are overburdened, and I will give you rest. This is what St. Camillus dedicated about 30 years of his life to, once he was ordained. He had his own burdens, and he was known for those burdens before he became a priest, and he was known for helping people with those burdens, both physical burdens, but things like gambling addictions and alcohol addiction and other things as well. These are realities in the lives of people today. And so we turn to St. Camillus today, praying for his assistance, his support, and we pray especially for the 3 new priests who have just started work in the Archdiocese of Sydney, working at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. We pray for them in their mission to help bring joy, to help bring the love of God to those who perhaps have lost a glimmer of hope. So we pray for them, and we pray especially for the intercession of St. Camillus today. St. Camillus de Lellis,